Yes, sir, that is the point. To show the workings of this principle, I will state that Arkansas in 1885 had an exemption clause in its Sunday law. That exemption clause, it was claimed, was taken advantage of by saloon keepers to keep open on Sunday. A delegation went to the legislature of Arkansas and asked them to repeal the exemption clause so that they could shut the saloons on Sunday. The legislature did it. If they had shut the saloons on Sunday, that would have been all well enough. But they did not even try it. There was not a saloon keeper arrested under that repealed law. There were only 2 men not keeping the seventh day who were arrested under it. There was not a man who did not keep the seventh-day fine under it. But there were Seventh-day Baptists and some Seventh-day Adventists, poor almost as Job's turkey, who were prosecuted and fined. One man had his only horse taken from him, and his cow, and at last his brethren contributed money to save him from jail. Such men were prosecuted time and again, and the lawyers of the state, under the leadership of Senator Crockett, succeeded in carrying through the legislature, against the persistent opposition of the church managers, a bill restoring the exemption clause, to save these poor, innocent people from the persecution that was being carried on.
I am glad you put in that fact, because it is something that happened.
I ask leave to read the statement made in the Arkansas legislature by Senator Crockett, upon that very subject. Quote, "Let me, sir, illustrate the operation of the present law by 1 or 2 examples. A Mr. Swearingen came from a northern state and settled on a farm in a certain county. His farm was 4 miles from town, and far away from any house of religious worship. He was a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and after having sacredly observed the Sabbath of his people, Saturday, by abstaining from all secular work, he and his son, a lad of 17, on the first day of the week went quietly about their usual avocations. They disturbed no one, interfered with the rights of no one. But they were observed, and reported to the grand jury, indicted, arrested, tried, convicted, fined, and having no money to pay the fine, these moral, Christian citizens of Arkansas were dragged to the county jail and imprisoned like felons for 25 days. And for what? For daring, in the so-called land of liberty, in the year of our Lord 1887, to worship God. Was this the end of the story? Alas, no, sir. They were turned out, and the old man's only horse, his sole reliance to make bread for his children, was levied on to pay the fine and costs, amounting to $38. The horse sold at auction for $27. A few days afterward the sheriff came again, and demanded $36, $11 balance due on fine and costs, and $25 for board for himself and son while in jail. And when the poor old man, a Christian, mind you, told him with tears that he had no money, he promptly levied on his only cow, but was persuaded to accept bond, and the amount was paid by contributions from his friends of the same faith. Sir, my heart swells to bursting with indignation as I repeat to you the infamous story. Another, and I am done. Sir, I beg you and these senators to believe that these are neither fancy nor exaggerated sketches. 5 years ago a young man, newly married, came to a certain county from Ohio. He and his wife were Seventh-day Baptists. The young girl had left father and mother, brothers and sisters, and all the dear friends of her childhood, to follow her young husband to Arkansas, to them the land of promise. The light of love sparkled in her bright young eyes. The roses of health were upon her cheeks, and her silvery laugh was sweet music, of which her young husband never wearied. They purchased a little farm, and soon by tireless industry and frugal thrift, their home blossomed like a rose in the wilderness. After a while a fair young babe came to them to brighten the sunshine, and sweeten the bird songs. They were happy in each other's affection and their love for the little one. For them all things worked together for good. For in their humble, trusting way, they worshiped God and loved their fellow men. 2 years ago the law under which their prosperity and happiness had had its growth was repealed. Accursed be the day which brought such a foul blot upon our state's fair fame. A change, sudden, cold, and blasting as an Arctic storm, came over their lives, and pitilessly withered all their bright flowers of hope. Unto this repeal, persecution lifted its ugly, venomous head. The hero of my sad story was observed by an envious, jealous neighbor, quietly working, as he believed God had commanded him, on Sunday. He was reported to that inquisitorial relic of barbarism, the grand jury, indicted, tried, convicted, and thrown into jail because his conscience would not let him pay the fine. Week after week dragged its slow length along. Day after day the young wife, with baby in her arms, watched at the gate for his coming, and, like Tennyson's Mariana, she only said, "My life is dreary, he cometh not," she said. She said, "I am a weary, I would, that I were dead." Then baby sickened and died. The light in the young wife's eyes faded out in tears. Her silvery laugh changed to low, wailing sobs. Pale-faced misery snatched the roses from her cheeks, and planted in their stead her own pallid hue. "Sir, how can I go on?" At length the cruel law was appeased, and this inoffensive citizen, except that he had loved God and sought to obey him, was released from prison, and dragged his weary feet to the happy home he had left a few short weeks before. He met his neighbors at the gate bearing a coffin. He asked no questions, his heart told him all. No, not all. He knew not, he could never know, of her lonely hours, of her bitter tears, of the weary watching and waiting, of the appeals to God, that God for whom she had suffered so much, for help in the hour of her extremity, of baby's sickness and death. He could not know of these. But he went with them to the quiet country burial place, and saw beside the open grave a little mound with dirt freshly heaped upon it, and then he knew that God had taken both his heart's idols, and he was left alone. His grief was too deep for tears. With staring eyes, he saw them lower the body of his young wife into the grave. He heard the clods rattle upon the coffin, and it seemed as if they were falling upon his heart. The work was done, and they left him with his dead. And then he threw himself down between the graves, with an arm across each little mound, and the tears came in torrents, and kept his heart from breaking. And then he sobbed this broken farewell to his darlings, and left Arkansas forever, left it, sir, as hundreds of others are preparing to leave, if this General Assembly fails to restore to them the protection of their rights under the Constitution, national and state. On next Monday, at Malvern, 6 as honest, good, and virtuous citizens as live in Arkansas, are to be tried as criminals for daring to worship God in accordance with the dictates of their own consciences, for exercising a right which this government, under the Constitution, has no power to abridge. Sir, I plead, in the name of justice, in the name of our Republican institutions, in the name of these inoffensive, God-fearing, God-serving people, our fellow citizens, and last, sir, in the name of Arkansas, I plead that this bill may pass, and this one foul blot be wiped from the escutcheon of our glorious Commonwealth." End quote. Arkansas was not alone in this, however, though it was worse there than anywhere else. I myself, with other brethren in California, had to send hundreds of dollars into Tennessee, to support the families of the brethren of our own faith there, while the husbands and fathers who made the money for their support were in jail because they chose to work for their families on Sunday, and make bread for them after having kept the Sabbath according to their conscience. That has been done, Mr. Chairman, in these United States. That is the care these people have for the laboring man.
You reason from that there should be no Sunday law whatever.
If you allow a Sunday law, you must allow it to any extent. It must be enforced. All they did in Arkansas was to enforce the law, simply as in the Roman Empire they enforced the law, and put Christians to death. They simply enforced the law, but the law was wrong. Any condition of the law that will allow such things as that is a wrong condition of the law.
This bill proposes that work must not be done to the disturbance of others. This work was done to the disturbance of others.
I know that this bill for a national Sunday law proposes that work must not be done quote-unquote, to the disturbance of others, and in that very phrase lies one of its worst features. The bill declares that no person shall do any work, or quote, engage in any play, game, or amusement, or recreation, to the disturbance of others, on the first day of the week, commonly known as the Lord's Day, or during any part thereof. End quote. This leaves it entirely with the other man to say whether that which I do disturbs him, and that is only to make every man's action on Sunday subject to the whim or caprice of his neighbor. And everybody knows that it requires a very slight thing to disturb one who has a spite or a prejudice against you. At the Illinois State Sunday Law Convention last month, November 20th, 21, Dr. R.O. Post, of Springfield, made a speech on the subject of Sunday recreation, in which he declared as the sum of his whole speech that, quote, there is no kind of recreation that is proper or profitable on Sunday, outside of the home or the sanctuary. End quote. Only let such a law as is embodied in this bill become of force where R.O. Post D.D. is, and any kind of recreation outside of the home or the sanctuary would be sure to disturb him, and the one engaged in the recreation could be arrested and prosecuted. But it may be argued that no judge or jury would uphold any such prosecution. That is not at all certain, as we shall yet see. But whether or not it is so, it is certain that, if your neighbor should say that what you did disturbed him, under such a law as that he could have you arrested, and put to the inconvenience and expense of defending yourself before the court. In 1887, the city of San Francisco, California, had an ordinance on another subject that embodied the very principle of this clause of this Sunday bill. It reads thus: no person shall in any place indulge in conduct having a tendency to annoy persons passing or being upon the public highway, or upon adjacent premises. It is easy to see that the principle of this ordinance is identical with that of the clause in the first section of this bill, which forbids anything to the disturbance of others.